It's me again. I thought I'd throw this video out to see if anyone messed with my ideas. Aside from my personal life and these YouTube videos, I like to write a lot. I'm all for creative exercises, and a couple years ago I released an hour-long pitch for The Amazing Spider-Man 3, which is sitting at 4,500 views, and I couldn't be happier with it. I was always worried that nobody would want to watch these kinds of videos, but the response has been more than kind and more supportive than I could have ever imagined. I just want to start this video off by thanking everyone who took the time to sit through that video, and any other videos for that matter. I know this channel is a little all over the place in regards to what topics I cover, but that's just true to who I am. I love many different variations of art, whether it's music, movies, television, comics, or short films. So, once again, thank you so much for sticking around. Thank you for always watching and supporting. It means the world to me. Now, without further ado, here's a little creative exercise I've been working on. I've been developing a story split into 6 to 8 episodes around a character named James Howlett, aka Logan, aka the Wolverine. I've titled this screenplay Logan the Wanderer, and in today's video, I'm going to give you a play-by-play of the plot I've written, specifically pitching the show's first episode, as if you were Marvel themselves. I hope you enjoy what I came up with. We begin with a wide shot on a dark and vacant country road. A sliver of sunshine peers through the peak of the mountain, far off in the distance, as the time of day we approach is sunrise. Closer to the far right of the edge of frame, a single spotlight grows near, followed by the distant rattling of an old motorcycle engine. Soon enough, the light draws near into the frame, and we pan to show the rider slowing down and pulling in front of a small diner. The rider shuts her engine and removes her helmet. She's young, early 20s, with blonde streaks in her otherwise dark hair. Her eyes scan the scene around her with a lingering sense of worry and hesitation before collecting a bag from the back of her bike and entering the diner. Once inside, she hastily walks towards the front counter, taking note of a group of 6 truckers laughing obnoxiously to themselves. Her eyes wander on the group, and one of the countrymen for a second takes note of her. The woman snaps out of her trance-like gaze and walks over to what appears to be the only employee at this diner. Another telltale sign of the blatantly early time of morning. The woman behind the counter asks what the mysterious motorcyclist would like, to which our young pseudo-protagonist replies by saying she'd like a coffee with an ungodly amount of sugar. It's clear that she's on edge and tired. She's been riding all night. She tries her best to remain calm, and the lady working the diner lets her know to have a seat, to which the biker girl places herself within watching distance of the obnoxious group of truck drivers. Much to her surprise, she also notices another man, alone, in the corner booth, dressed in a red flannel and blue jeans, sporting a cowboy hat, and pouring alcohol from a flask into his coffee mug. With our pseudo-protagonist nervously tapping her foot against the floor, her coffee arrives. She glances back at the group of truckers and notices one of them staring at her. She attempts to ignore the man, who doesn't take the hint and instead gets up to approach her, introducing himself in a shy and awkward manner. The biker makes it clear that she isn't interested in exchanging pleasantries, to which our nervous trucker takes note and apologizes for disturbing her. He then returns to his booth. To make the situation more awkward, the truckers grow louder and more irritating when their fellow man returns, failing to pick up the biker, leaving her embarrassed and more anxious than ever before. Meanwhile, the cafe worker walks past them to the lone man at the corner booth, asking if he'd like a refill on his coffee, to which he responds with a polite no in his deep and rustic voice. He then pays for his meal before gathering his own duffel bag, ready to leave the diner. Our pseudo-protagonist takes note of the man leaving and conveys a distinct but subtle look of worry, which only grows with intensity when another man from the trucker table approaches her with a hostile look in his eye. The man, who's named Max, doesn't appreciate how the biker treated his friend, trying to be a wingman of sorts but coming across as an aggressive drunk. The woman we've been following to this point doesn't make things any easier for herself when she points out his intoxicated rambling, giving him attitude, to which Max begins to insult her. The other trucker who previously tried to score a date, who's named Hank, tries to step in and defuse the situation, but it's clear Max wants a problem, and the biker girl knows it. As the altercation continues, the man in the cowboy hat steps out of the diner, as signaled by the bell ringing above the front door. He then walks towards his own truck right across from the girl's motorcycle. Back in the diner, the cafe worker tries to step in and defend the girl, threatening to call the cops, but one man intimidates her by flashing his handgun by his waist, prompting her to panic and freeze up. Max then makes it clear that he will not accept the way he's being spoken to by the biker girl, and just when things appear to be going south, the bell chime from the front door rings again, followed by an all too familiar catchphrase. "Hey, bub, what's the problem?" The man in the red flannel asks, having returned from the truck to intervene. To make things a little more confusing, the biker girl is seen visibly at ease, even smiling. "Fuck off, pint size, none of your damn business," Max responds, trying to intimidate the man in the cowboy hat, but he fails as the stranger ignores his comment and looks directly at the biker girl. "You okay?" he asks, his voice forcing concern in a reserved tone, signaling that he is replacing a different emotion, a more irritable one. "She's fine, back off, midget," one of the other guys chimes in, flashing their gun at the lone stranger, but he seems completely unfazed. The woman working at the cafe begs that they take the altercation outside, with our pseudo-protagonist attempting to get up and leave before getting grabbed by the wrist. The stranger demands Max lets her go, inviting him to step outside to settle things fairly, to which Max drunkenly agrees with a cocky smile, letting go of the biker girl's arm. Our pseudo-protagonist walks over in a haste towards the stranger in the cowboy hat, thanking him for coming back to help her. The lone man in the flannel responds with a nod before opening the door for the biker, and nods to the other truckers to meet him outside. Once out, the sun seems to have risen a tad from where it was before. It's now golden hour, and our pseudo-protagonist remains by the lone stranger's side instead of just simply leaving. The man in the cowboy hat even tells her to go, but she needs to stay, she says, an odd choice of words that confuses everyone. The truckers stand aside as Max approaches the stranger and attempts to intimidate him again, even removing his pistol, before ultimately handing it off to one of his buddies. Once the scene turns into a brawl, the woman inside the diner reaches her landline phone and calls the cops. As the fight starts, Max uses his bigger size to his advantage, landing multiple hooks to hurt the lone stranger, eventually knocking his hat off as he falls to the ground. The biker grabs a hold of the hat for safekeeping, with the man in the red flannel dramatically taking his sweet time to get back up, almost as if he's been rocked. Max attempts to move in to finish the fight, but finds himself surprisingly overwhelmed by the animalistic and fast barrage of punches. As the stranger retaliates from the beating he endured twice over, Max pulls out a pocket knife and stabs the lone man in the stomach, pulling the blade from his flesh repeatedly and digging it back in. It doesn't take long for our man in the red to collapse on the ground, bleeding profusely and struggling to breathe, seemingly dying. The group of truckers don't seem to care much at all that one of their buddies just committed murder, instead celebrating by cracking open beers and chugging them. Only the biker woman and Hank, who, despite hanging with a bad crowd, look mortified. However, the look of horror and shock on their faces isn't because they witnessed a murder. It's because despite seeing him die in front of their eyes, he's risen back up to his feet, pissed off in a pure, unbridled rage. As the other truckers take notice of the stranger's miraculous revival, they warn Max of his incoming aggressive pace. Max turns around with confusion, which quickly turns into absolute shock when he's met face to face with the lone stranger once again. His eyes widen in pure terror as he feels a sharp pressure penetrate his stomach, gazing into the eyes of the man he thought he killed. "Fair's fair," the stranger speaks out quietly with a sick and twisted grin before ripping his hand away from Max's gut. In a scene of absolute horror, Max looks down at his wound and notices his insides falling out of his stomach. More shocking than that, he observes 3 protruding metal claws coming from between the stranger's knuckles, completely soaked in his own blood. Max then slumps over and dies. The others all shout various confusing and terrifying reactions before unloading their pistol ammunition on the mutant in front of them. Some of the bullets lodge into the stranger's skin, while the others ricochet off his head, hitting diner windows and even the biker girl's back tire. Another set of metal claws emerge from the stranger's other hand, ripping through his flesh. With a roar, the stranger charges forward, slashing at the other truckers, taking off their limbs one by one, penetrating their chests and foreheads with his claws as they try and scatter or fight back. The only one left alive is Hank, who, despite almost being slain last, is spared by the pseudo-protagonist yelling out for the stranger to stop. The man in the red flannel surprisingly listens, snapping out of his vengeful anger, retracting his claws and telling the kid to get lost. Hank accepts and climbs into one of the trucks, driving away quickly in a state of shock and fear. The woman hesitantly returns the stranger his cowboy hat, to which he apologizes for having to see what she just saw. Strangely enough, the woman reveals she's seen worse, which confuses the man once again, brushing it off as if he doesn't care. The woman thanks the stranger for stepping in to protect her, gracefully mentioning how she thought she'd never meet the real Wolverine or any of the X-Men in person. For a second, her face lights up like a fangirl, but her moment of reprise is quickly shut down when Wolverine tells her that he's not that person, nor is he heroic or an X-Men. Wolverine then re-enters the diner and observes all the shattered glass along the floor. He calls out to the cafe worker, asking if she's alright, but receives no response. As he takes a look around, his facial expression drops to despair and shame once he finds her lifeless body in a pool of blood on the floor. Wolverine bends down to shut her eyes, visibly regretful of his actions, before exiting the diner. Outside, the biker complains about her flat tire, to which Wolverine tells her that it's the least she should worry about and that she's lucky she isn't dead, or worse, at the hands of those truckers. The biker lady asks what happened to the worker, to which Wolverine replies by saying she's dead, his voice cold and devoid of emotion, although his eyes clearly display signs of rage and regret. Wolverine then proceeds to climb into his truck and start the engine, which leads the biker asking where he's going. Wolverine avoids replying, attempting to back out of the driveway, but the biker shouts at him to wait and listen to what she has to say. Wolverine tells her to get lost and leave him alone, but she insists that she needs to stay with him, her concern returning with a paranoid gaze. Wolverine asks why on earth he would take on the responsibility of tending to a 20-something-year-old girl who should be in college, to which she responds with a curious statement. "I was sent here to find you. Professor Xavier sent me here to find you." Wolverine doesn't believe her at first, but more explanation follows. I saw an online interview a couple years ago about the two leaders of the X-Men, Cyclops and Professor Xavier. They talked about mutants and what they were, and how we shouldn't be afraid of them. About how the professor opened a school for them to learn, so that they can be taught to control their powers, so that they didn't have to be scared anymore. Wolverine listens intently, curious but annoyed at the biker girl as she continues to tell her story. In that interview, the professor showed the world his powers. He made the interviewer learn how to dance the tango. He asked journalists to think of questions in their head, and then he answered them before they even spoke, or by using telepathy. I know it sounds like a long shot, but I think I heard him, in my head. He showed me this place. He showed me that you would protect me. He told me to find you because I think you're supposed to take me to him. Wolverine discounts her theory and tells her that Professor Xavier would never trust him to bring a mutant to his school. He'd send anyone but him to protect her from whatever she's scared of. The woman reveals her name is Cassie and that she thinks the professor believes that she is a mutant, to which Wolverine responds by suggesting that a mutant's abilities tend to manifest and develop at an early teenage year, not as a young adult. Cassie tries to make the case that she's a late bloomer, but when asked what her mutant ability is, she reveals she doesn't know. She doesn't understand what her powers are and how they work, if they work at all. They're not anything physical. Wolverine calls bullshit and attempts to leave again, but Cassie shows resilience by running after his truck even as he drives away. Despite obviously not being able to keep up with the vehicle, Cassie continues to race after it as if her life depended on it, until she eventually trips and falls, hitting her head on the concrete. Wolverine takes notice in his rearview mirror but continues driving a couple of seconds at first. He doesn't stop, but once he notices Cassie not moving, he hits the brakes and turns the truck around to go check on her. Once pulling up beside her, Wolverine hops out of the truck and notices blood spilt around and underneath her head. Wolverine then turns her body over, expecting to see Cassie dead with a skull-related fracture, but instead finds her head completely intact, with no visible cuts or any signs of injury. Cassie then wakes up and asks what happened, having no memory of falling or how she got away from the cafe and her bike. Wolverine asks her what the last thing she remembers is, to which she responds by saying that all she remembers is seeing her bike having a flat tire. Wolverine helps Cassie to her feet, to which Cassie immediately jumps into explaining the same thing she explained earlier, about how she saw Professor X online and suspects that he may be trying to contact her and let her know that she's a mutant. Welcome to his school. Wolverine explains that she already told him all this, to which Cassie looks at him confused and unaware of what she's said and hasn't said. Against his better judgment, Wolverine tells Cassie to get into the truck and that he'll take her to the X-Mansion, believing that there is no way an ordinary girl could fall on her face, have that much blood pool out of her skull, and still be alive without a scratch. Cassie excitedly jumps into the passenger side of Wolverine's car, and they begin to drive off, although Cassie specifically begs him to return to collect her bike. Wolverine tells her that it's pointless because it has a flat and the cops are on their way, to which Cassie replies by saying the bike was her father's, and that he and her mother died a few months prior in an accident that she can't remember the day she was supposed to move out for college. She explains that all she does remember is seeing their bodies massacred, along with the words "Purify Humanity" painted in blood on her walls. Cassie concludes the story by saying her memory ends at seeing the blood on the wall, and that everything afterwards is fuzzy. Wolverine keeps his comments to himself, silently returning to the diner to retrieve Cassie's bike. Cassie thanks Wolverine for helping her stay safe and for agreeing to drive to New York to drop her off at the X-Mansion. Wolverine tries to play the situation off as if he's not someone who should be idolized or praised for being heroic, to which Cassie disagrees but keeps further comments to herself after noticing agitation on the subject. As the pair drive off on the country road, Cassie asks an important question. So, you say you're not an X-Men, and you're not the Wolverine, then what does that make you? Wolverine takes a deep breath, sighing with uncertainty. His voice drops to a measly, insecure tone, with a faint shake in his throat as he echoes the words, "I don't know." Cassie asks if there's another name she can refer to him as, seeing as how they're going to be spending a lot of time together in the lead up to reaching the X-Mansion. Wolverine replies, James Logan. Cassie makes a snarky comment on how odd it is for James to have two first names, to which James replies by pulling out dog tags from behind his flannel, handing them to Cassie. "You see these?" he asks, his voice once again weaker, soft in tone. "These are all I have. They're the only things I carry around that are important to me. They're the only reason I even know my name." With that admission, the car goes silent. Cassie hands James back his dog tags, then reaches her hand out to brush her thumb against his arm while he steers the truck. With a soft tone in her voice, she replies, "Nice to meet you, James." James gives her a passing glance of acceptance, which reassures Cassie that she is safe and on the right path. With those personable memories exchanged, James tells Cassie to strap in and get some rest. "It's going to be a long drive to New York, kid," James says, turning on the radio to a track at a low volume. The track is Sean James's Through the Valley, which begins to echo as both diegetic and non-diegetic music, closing us off as we cut to credits. And because this is a Marvel production, or at least I hope it may be one day, An end-credit scene plays out, giving us a glimpse to the day Cassie was meant to go to college. We begin with police alarms blaring in the background of a warm summer's day. The setting looks like a quiet suburb, but smoke begins to come out from the corner of the screen as we pan over to a burning home. In front of the home, Cassie stands still, frozen in fear, silently crying and screaming her heart out due to grief of losing her parents and watching her childhood home burn. As the police sirens slowly grow louder, it becomes evident that there are no first responders on site yet, implying that Cassie lied about her memory getting fuzzy after entering the house and seeing blood on the walls. As Cassie falls to her knees, continuing to cry out in agony, we pan over to a specific detail imprinted on the front yard, something quite jarring and left out of context. A cross, planted on the ground, upright and on fire. Cut to black. Thank you all for watching this first episode pitch video for an original story I've been developing that I call Logan the Wanderer. If you enjoyed the direction I'm heading in and happen to know anybody at Marvel Studios, be it a comic agent or a TV producer, consider showing them this video as my pitch. The best way to get in contact with me is probably through my Instagram and Twitter, which I'm going to link in the description of this video, or simply through the comments section of this video. I have a full series developed and ready for writing. The full script for the pilot, episode 1, is also completely written, and I'm working towards completing screenplays for the rest of the limited series as we speak, all in the hopes that one day I'll get lucky enough to fully realize this vision. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Pendejo. Cabrón. Ándale pues.